Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's explainer, where we're going to unpack something that is incredibly deeply relatable, but it's almost never actually talked about out loud. We're looking at a really profound piece of writing called The Weight of Becoming Invisible. And it just beautifully, painfully captures that very specific, very quiet way a person can slowly kind of lose their own identity. Let me ask you a question right off the bat. And I mean, really think about this for a second. Have you ever had a moment where you looked in the mirror and just barely recognized the person staring back at you? It's a super heavy question, right? The source material we're looking at highlights that this vulnerable, almost shocking realization typically hits a whole lot of women, usually right smack in their 40s or 50s. It's this moment of piercing clarity where you suddenly realize, whoa, something inside me has fundamentally shifted.
So let's get right into section 1, the quiet realization. See, this first phase, it doesn't announce itself with some loud crash. It completely sneaks up on you in the stillness. The author draws this brilliant contrast that really hit home for me. When we think of life crises, we almost always picture this dramatic, everything on fire kind of event, right? It's visible, it's chaotic, it draws attention, and people instantly rush in with buckets of water to help. But this is totally different. This is the realization that something has gone quietly wrong. It is literally the quietest, most invisible problem possible. Because to the outside world, your life probably looks completely fine, maybe even highly successful. But internally, the very foundation of who you are has just quietly slipped away. So the crucial point here is understanding what it actually means to be soul tired. The woman looking back in that mirror isn't just physically exhausted. I mean, sure, as the author notes, she is definitely that too. But soul tired is the state of carrying something so incredibly heavy for so long that you literally forget you're even carrying it. The weight stops just tiring out your muscles. It actually merges with you. It becomes a core part of who you are. It's a deep, bone-level exhaustion that a good night's sleep is absolutely not going to fix. The author actually shares this striking personal moment that triggers her whole awakening. She writes, "I have sat in my car at 2 in the morning, staring at a face in the mirror I barely recognized, and asked myself the question that changes everything." Now that 2 a.m. car mirror moment, that is incredibly powerful. It really highlights the sheer bravery it takes to just sit there in the quiet dark, strip away all the noisy daily distractions, and ask yourself the hardest, most honest questions about where you actually went. Which brings us to section 2, 1,000 tiny choices. Understanding exactly how this gradual fade happens is just fascinating because, again, it doesn't happen overnight. And this brilliantly illustrates the point, as the author puts it, one of the strangest things about losing yourself is that it happens so slowly you don't notice until you're already gone. Losing yourself is almost never this single explosive event. You don't just wake up one random Tuesday completely stripped of your personality. It's a slow, steady erosion of the self that slips entirely under the radar. I really want you to think about how often you might have chosen someone else's comfort over your own truth. The author breaks down how this erasure happens, and it's through 1,000 small, honestly heartbreaking micro-sacrifices. You stopped wearing the color you love, just because someone casually said it was too much. You stopped laughing too loudly because someone called you embarrassing. You stopped sharing your opinions because the last time you did, it started a fight that just wasn't worth the energy to finish. You stopped dreaming because dreaming started to feel like this luxury you simply couldn't afford anymore. Each one of these is just a tiny piece of yourself that you traded away to keep the peace. And all of that brings us to this utterly terrifying consequence. You adapted to the room. You can become so incredibly skilled at being whoever the room needs you to be that you totally forget who you actually are when the room is empty. Think about that for a second. Your identity essentially became completely conditional on the people standing around you. Let's move to section 3, the unplanned reality, and see how this builds over time. This loss of self, it obviously doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's very often accelerated by this brutal backstory of just trying to survive. If we track this chronologically, we start in the early years. Picture a young woman totally full of hope and possibility. No one plans for the hard path. But then we hit the middle years, which end up characterized by surviving relationships that took way, way more than they ever gave back. It's this grueling period defined by working, praying, pushing, and just keeping going when keeping going felt completely impossible. And ultimately, that relentless years-long survival mode leads directly into the 50s and straight to that pivotal 2 a.m. mirror moment we talked about earlier. As the author explicitly points out, literally nobody plans to be a single mother. Taking on that mantle means you're suddenly playing all the roles at once. You are the provider, you are the nurturer, the disciplinarian, and the soft place to land. And you're doing all of this at the exact same time, all the time, with absolutely zero backup, no relief, and no one to top in when you are running on empty. You essentially have to become an entire village wrapped up into one very, very exhausted person.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how logically, step by step, this completely overwhelming life actually arrives. It's almost never some grand master plan. Step 1, it's handed to you by circumstance. Step 2, it's dictated by pure, unfiltered survival. And Step 3, it's chosen, ultimately, to protect yourself or your child from something much worse. The author plainly states she didn't become a single mother because she wanted to, but because the alternative was simply worse. These are deeply sympathetic, fiercely protective reasons why women end up shouldering these massive, totally unplanned burdens.
And finally, we arrive at Section 4, the weight of responsibility. As we look at the ultimate burden that drives this deep exhaustion, listen to this really powerful realization. I had learned to be alone inside a relationship long before I was technically single. I mean, wow, that shifts the entire paradigm, doesn't it? The author admits she was terrified in the beginning, for sure, but she clarifies that the fear actually wasn't about being alone or being lonely. Why? Because that profound loneliness had already been there long before the relationship actually ended. Being technically single didn't create the isolation. It just put a formal name to what was already happening every single day. So if the true terror wasn't the loneliness itself, what on earth was it? Well, the true terror is exactly this. Every single decision landing squarely on your shoulders with absolutely no one to share the weight. It's the crushing, suffocating reality of being responsible, of being the only one. That is the specific weight that drains the soul. It's the constant, unrelenting pressure of being the sole architect of your family's survival day in and day out, with no breaks. Which brings us to the end of our explainer today, and really to our final question. The author notes that one morning you wake up and it is just your life, the one you are actually living right now. So, what are you going to do with it? It's a beautifully provocative thought to leave you with. We've traced this whole timeline of how the self gets quietly lost, through 1,000 tiny compromises, through the insanely heavy burdens of pure survival. But recognizing that tired face in the mirror at 2 a.m., that is the first incredibly brave step, because it forces you to ask how you might begin peeling back all those layers, stepping out of that room you've adapted to for so long, and finally, reclaiming the vital, beautiful identity you left behind.